Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Bernice. I just want to welcome you all to our Grace Conference seminar this weekend. This is March the 8th, so it's March the 8th, 9th, and 10th, with our good friend, Michael Williams. And we're so happy that he's come here to our cold Calgary from Tennessee. I'm thinking it's a bit warmer than here, Michael. Yeah, no, not so much.
Not much, no.
Not so much. But anyway, I was just saying to some of the folks here that, you know, we would take our cold that we've had any day to those tornadoes that just, you know, kind of suddenly appear in the middle of the night or the day down there. Yeah. And you're part of the country. Yeah. Or where Don is down in Alabama. I'm so glad that he and his wife are okay. And well, this is going to be a great weekend. Michael says, I think we all know, but maybe we don't. He's going to speak on Hebrews. He said it's going to be topical Hebrews. I said, did you say tropical? That would be good. I think we need warmth here. But anyway, topical Hebrews. So it's changed somewhat, I think, a little bit from what he first thought it was. But anyway, I want to welcome you all because I know a lot of you have come through some pretty bad winter storms just to get here. So that in itself is amazing, and that shows your dedication and your love for this gospel, and hopefully some more folks will be here tomorrow or make it through as well. So we just want to welcome our friend Viney, who's come from Airdrie, and friends from Edmonton and Bashaw and other parts of our province, and we have our good friend Dr. Leslie too will be here shortly. But anyway, we're excited to have you, Michael.
Thank you.
Michael resides in Tennessee now. He's not in Florida anymore. Is it okay for me to say that?
Yeah.
It is. He's looking after his baby sister. She's got Alzheimer's, and he says he's enjoying it very much. It's been a real growing experience, but a wonderful one. Al and I, my husband and I, had a really lovely dinner with Mike on Wednesday night because he flew in then. And we understand all about Alzheimer's because my father-in-law had it, so it was great to hear his story and to be able to offer some encouragement that way and understanding, that's for sure. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much time here because we want Mike to have as much time as he needs to speak on Hebrews. So I am going to welcome you to the podium.
Thank you. Let me see, you guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
We got this going? Nardos?
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to go with what we got here, and we're looking forward to this seminar. Now, as usual, you guys aren't going to be surprised by this. After I arrived here, everything started rearranging, so I began to realize that there were some things that we needed to address, and they became more important as time went on. I started seeing them a bit before I left home, and then as I got here, and then more conversations and more research that I was doing, I realized that there was a part of this that's going to be brand new for you guys. You're going to hear me say something you have never heard me say before. But you're kind of used to that, right? But we are going to go into the book of Hebrews. Now, I've been very, very strong about who is the writer of Hebrews. Anybody that has ever challenged that Paul wrote the book of Hebrews, I've always really shot that down and had explained my reasons. And I knew all of this time that there is nothing that says in the book of Hebrews that Paul or any other author is credited with this book. Now that is just very clear. It is a great departure, however, from Paul's writings where that he always says who he is and has certain salutations and all of this, but this book didn't have those. But as I looked at it, I just could not imagine someone having the understanding of the Old Covenant to be able to write this book until now. So as we started, like I said, as I started looking into this, it became very interesting and finally became very obvious to me, and this is what you're going to hear that you've never heard me say before. I am now convinced that Paul the Apostle did not write the book of Hebrews. Now, I've always told you who I was sure didn't write it. Peter, James, and John didn't do it, okay? These guys just did not do this magnificent work that is in Hebrews. But as I started, you know, and you guys know me, if I'm going to find out information about something, I want it to be, it's wonderful that people study the history and all of this, of these things, and their hypothesis about the potentials and possibilities, but I want to see it in the writings, somewhere here in this book. Is there anything in the New Testament that would indicate to us who this writer is? So as we get into this, of topical Hebrews, and the reason that we went to topical Hebrews, and I might as well tell you now that this topical Hebrews session, which I'm going to be doing all of these sessions, and Nardos is going to speak some also, but I'll be speaking every session. But even with that, we're still going to have more topics left. So I have to tell you right up front that this spring conference is topical Hebrews number 1, and then this fall we'll be doing topical Hebrews number 2. It's going to take both of them to get us all the way through the topics that are in Hebrews. Now, so that's a little bit different than what we normally do in our verse by verse, but you guys know we've done verse by verse all the way through Hebrews and many of the other books and letters, especially those of Paul's. And now we're going to be doing a verse by verse of somebody else's writings. And for me, it's really exciting. I want to tell you just a little bit of the evolution of this understanding. And as I started opening up to this possibility that, you know, the thing I had to concede was that there is no place that says Paul wrote this. First off, foremost, it's just not there. But like I said, for me to consider that one of the other disciples may have written this is just inconceivable. It's just not even possible that that even happened. As I started understanding a little bit more, and I was talking to Don, and we found out that the Greek that is used in the book of Hebrews is a much more eloquent Greek. It's a higher form of Greek than is used in Paul's letters. So it's one of the signatures that you would look for in the consistency about the authorship of different books. It is actually the Greek, because all of this is translated from the Greek. So what we were looking at then is it possible, number one, because this Greek language that is used in the book of Hebrews is more highly refined, I guess you would say. So I started considering that, and then I had a conversation with Vic just about a week ago. I guess it was, wasn't it, Vic? Not too much more than a week ago, to show you how quickly this has evolved. And Vic is reading a 900-page book, and I told him, congratulations, let me know what it's all about when you're done. Most people know, don't hand me a 900-page book because it's not going to go anywhere. Now, if you got some highlights in there, I can go through and see what got your attention, hand me the book. But otherwise, I'm not going to be reading through a book like that. Vic has waded through over 300 pages of it so far. And he was telling me about the writer of this, doing the history of this, was saying, commenting about Apollos being the writer of the book of Hebrews, considering that possibility. And there was something that Vic said that captured my imagination, that hooked me on this. And Vic said, isn't that amazing? He said, I'm so excited about this. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're trying to prove that Paul didn't write the book of Hebrews. What's exciting about that, Paul's my hero. And then we're trying to prove that he didn't write the book of Hebrews. And so anyway, Vic said, wouldn't it be, it's fascinating to me. It's so exciting to me to think that somebody else at that time understood the gospel other than just Paul. That captured my imagination. That there was others and people who were, had the education and had the understanding of the Greek language and had the understanding of the scriptures to be able to write an incredible letter like this in the book of Hebrews. So I'm going to point out to you some things that as we look at this, why we would question whether or not this was actually written by Paul. Are we losing the connection there? Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to continue on here in this about topical Hebrews. Now, as we get into this, we're going to go through several verses that cover some of the understanding that the New Testament contains about Apollos. How many of you have heard the name Apollos in the New Testament? We know he's there. Now, the thing that I was surprised about is how much is there about Apollos. And it's not just there in a mention about, Apollos was with Paul. But in fact, there's entire stories about his life. There's comments in there about his travels, about the things that he did, and the importance that Paul actually placed on the life of Apollos and on Apollos' teachings also. Now, I asked Don to tell me what it was that would cause him to think that the book of Hebrews might not have been written by Paul, and that alone. He didn't give us anything here that would tell us who the writer is, but Don jotted down some things in his understanding of the Greek and in this comparisons between the letters, and here is what Don sent to me, actually just today. And he says, these are the most compelling reasons I have found thus far. Number one, Paul's traditional salutation is missing. And that is true. Paul's salutation is not here. The book of Hebrews quotes extensively from the Old Testament. Paul, as a Pharisee, would have been familiar with the scriptures in its original Hebrew language. In other letters, Paul either quotes that original Hebrew language or he paraphrases it. However, all of the quotes in this epistle, are taken from the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament. The Septuagint is the translation of the Old Testament into Greek. And this is a work that has been highly respected for all of these centuries as being very trustworthy as a translation of the Old Testament into the Greek. So you have Paul doing his work in his quotes directly from the Hebrew, and you have the writer of the book of Hebrews quoting from the Septuagint and the Greek Old Testament, which is inconsistent with this epistle and taken out of the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, which is inconsistent with Paul's usage. Finally, Paul was an apostle who claimed to receive his revelation directly from Jesus. We know that, right? Remember all the times that we've read through what Paul said? I was riding on my donkey, and the story. And he did that more than one time. He spoke of his revelation that he got with being with Jesus for 3 years in the desert. He speaks of it often. However, the writer of the book of Hebrews makes the statement and specifically says that he was taught this by another apostle. The writer of Hebrews makes no claim that Jesus himself or a revelation came to him like what Paul says came to him. The style of Hebrew except in the closing verses, is quite unlike any other writing of Paul's that has survived. In keeping with the style of a person well educated in formal rhetoric, the Greek of Hebrews is highly literary and very ornate. The vocabulary is sophisticated, and it includes 150 words that are not found elsewhere in the New Testament. So we're mounting some evidence here that says that this writer was functioning in a level of Greek that is not even in Paul's writings. There's over 150 words that are used in the book of Hebrews that are not used in Paul's writings. 10 that do not occur in any other Greek writings that have survived for our studies. The structure of the epistle conforms to the conventions found in Greek rhetoric used when a speech was designed to persuade its audience to action. Much of its rhetorical achievement is lost when the original Greek of Hebrews is translated into modern language. But in the original, it is a very flamboyant type of Greek. The high rhetoric quality, the high rhetorical quality of Hebrews indicates that its author most likely has the most advanced literary education of any New Testament writer. And the last point that Don makes here is its theology, though very compatible with that of Paul's letters, is very distinctive. The Apostle Paul, for instance, never alludes to Jesus being a priest, which is the major part of the book of Hebrews. Paul never makes a mention of Jesus being a priest or a great high priest whatsoever. So there are those things. Then these are my observations of it. I love Paul. You guys know that I just absolutely love his writing. I love his sass. I love the way that he appeals to people. He's very real. We know that Paul taught in the dialectic. But when Paul taught in the dialectic, he wasn't just comparing the Old Covenant scriptures to the New Covenant reality. He was challenging current false doctrine that he thought was false doctrine. So his comparative teachings were to the other apostles. That's lacking in the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews does not contradict anybody. It doesn't address anybody. And that's all Paul did throughout all of his letters, as far as I can remember. Paul did debate. Paul was in debate form when he was doing this. He even argued with and insulted and confronted the other writers of the New Testament. There is none of that mentioned in the book of Hebrews whatsoever. Paul was very sarcastic. There is not an ounce of sarcasm that I've been able to find in the book of Hebrews. Now, how many of you know some sarcastic people? Do you think that, I think the ones that raised their hands was like, yeah, that's me. You know what? You can't just turn it off. You know, it is a part of the way you communicate, and you can't say, okay, I'm going to write the most dynamic letter that I've ever written, and I'm going to leave all of my personality out of it. I'm going to leave my sarcasm out. Now, Apollos, in writing Hebrews, it is allegorical, but there is no debate. He does not try to contradict. He doesn't try to point out where someone is wrong. He doesn't present, he presents an argument, but there is no insults in the book of Hebrews, and there's no confrontations there. And those are the things that I began to notice that caused me to question the reality of, did Paul actually write this letter? So based on those, and I can tell you that if you Google this, you're going to be able to find out a whole lot more about this issue. This is not a brand new thing. I was really surprised when I started looking at it. And there, of course, are all sides to it. There's those who point out that many people have concluded that Apollos wrote the book of Hebrews, but they say they are misguided. But I started looking at it, and as the ones that they were saying were misguided, they didn't have these reasons for coming to that conclusion. They didn't have my reasons down. They had other reasons down for coming to those conclusions, but they didn't have my reasons down. And so I think with us understanding the gospel from the perspective that we do, we have a better advantage of looking at this to really determine whether or not Paul actually wrote this letter. I think that we have a better advantage than anyone has in the understanding of the gospel of grace and peace than any others actually could possibly have in addressing this issue. So, the book of Hebrews. It's going to take us just a little bit to get to it, because now I absolutely feel compelled to take you through the New Testament, and we're going to cover every place that I could find where Apollos is spoken of. How many of you would find that interesting? All right, so what we're going to do then is just find out, what does the New Testament say about Apollos, and especially what does Paul say about him? You know, Paul had a lot to say about the disciples, didn't he? He had plenty to say. And does he have things to say about Apollos? Where does Paul place Apollos as far as trusting him and his insights as far as the gospel is concerned?